we're trying to make it as easy as possible to install and to use. But there are a lot of things that we want to cover in this workshop. So should we get started?
Yeah,
should we
sure.
work more on like installing so people have something to work with? What would you guys, would you like to spend more time installing Docker Desktop and stuff? Because we can. I don't want to leave you behind. All right, thank you, Yamil. The instructions to install are at under install a demo for the Docker demo. The steps include downloading Docker Desktop and then installing the Portainer extension, which is a pretty simple thing. The GIF shows you how to do it. It might take a little while. And then, oh man, I'm sorry. I'm using the wrong, trying to use too many computers at once. So there's this Portainer extension that's required. I'm not actually sure why, but then you need to run a script by double clicking it. So for Linux and Mac users, it's the setup.command one. For Windows users, it's setup.bat. They should do the same thing, just sets up, I don't know, your Docker file or something, Docker compose file. And then you can select, use Portainer to open up this stack of containers, I guess.
You know, well, yeah. I'm not sure we have enough context yet to really fully appreciate like what is Portainer, but
yeah, this is supposed to be a workshop on working in the system. The goals of the session, we'll show them to you in just a second. Yeah, we did want to be able to have people follow along. And this is not the way that you'd actually install it if you're going to be running a real site. This is just a way to set up something on your local machine so that you can follow along with stuff like this, play with it, try things out. Yeah. Okay.
Clone the repo if you know how to do that. That's the way I usually do it. You'll still get to the same result at the end. Do makeup, and it'll bring up the server in demo mode.
I think this is a very similar way, a similar thing to install than ILDC.
Yeah.
I think this one contains demo content, potentially. And in this one, you don't need to type anything into the command line. You do have to execute those bash scripts, but you can do that by double clicking on them instead of opening up a terminal. So that was, I think, the reason that we went this way, to try to make it less command line-y.
But if you're comfortable command line, run makeup, and that'll run the make demo. That'll actually do the demo import to some degree.
Don Yamil had a question for you. You mentioned that those that have older versions of Docker and don't have the extensions feature could still run the demo.
Yep.
Okay.
If you do it the clone route and through terminal, but not through this these instructions.
Cool. Right.
Yeah.
Should we get going?
Yeah. Go.
Okay. All right. We'll get going with the slides. Okay, so if you've clicked on the Portainer extension, do you see stacks in the list? I don't. Oh no, it shows up in my sidebar. I'm not sure. I just clicked the Portainer link and icon in the sidebar, and it's showing stacks. Yours is not showing stacks. I've got that local thing. Yeah. Do you see this part on the side with get started and add environments? I think I didn't have that also until I clicked this like get started whale. And then it set me up like a local environment, and then things ran as expected. Okay, great. So back over here. All right. I'm not sure how much, if everything will be covered today. I've got like 78 slides set up. So feel free to be like, go faster or skip this part. And we'll ask for feedback and stuff as we go through these. First, we're just going to give an intro to the Islandora system. And then we'll delve deep into managing Drupal content. So making content, how Islandora makes complex objects, that's collections and things like that. We'll talk about managing your content types and the fields that are on them. So how you store your metadata. Then we'll talk about contexts, which is a Drupal module that lets us do if-then kind of automatic behaviors. We'll talk about Fedora and RDF, as well as views and Solr, which kind of work together because now if you want to do Solr search stuff, you're going to be making views. And finally, I didn't put it on the agenda, but we do have a small section on Islandora Workbench. So getting your content in bulk into Islandora. Don, if you're able, can you type the advice you mentioned for how to run without the Portainer extension? All right. This is my interpretation of the Islandora stack. The majority of all our work is done within Drupal. And Drupal is connected to the system of other software, including Solr, which is a search engine, Matomo, which does like Google Analytics style tracking of how many people use your web page. And then Islandora itself allows Drupal to connect to a lot more stuff. So that's Alpaca, which is a server-like thing that helps us run derivatives. Crayfish, which make the actual derivatives. BlazeGraph, which is a triple store. Fedora, which is your RDF-based OCFL preservation layer. And Cantaloupe, which is an image server. So we're gonna be doing a lot in Drupal because all your Islandora stuff really is Drupal. This is a huge difference from Islandora 7, where your content in its canonical form was stored in the Fedora database. Here, your content is stored in Drupal, and all the managing and things you're going to be doing with it happen through Drupal. So if you're wondering like why I'm talking about all this stuff about Drupal administration tasks, that is why, because these are the skills that you'll need to manage an Islandora repo. And sorry to be crude with RTFM, but if you want to read the manual for documentation for Drupal, the user guide is pretty darn good. I'll admit, since Drupal 8, a lot of the documentation has kind of been out of date that you'll find. But if you go directly to the user guide, you can usually find stuff that applies to Drupal 8, 9, 10. If I were to put Drupal into a nutshell, anything that you see on the screen is content. How it all works is configuration. Content sometimes refers to what we call nodes, the main type of content, show up as like what you think of as a web page. But it can also refer to media, files, taxonomy terms, and there's a bunch of other content entities. If you sign into a Drupal site as user ID 1, usually called admin, then you can do anything. But other users aren't able to and need to have their specific permissions set. So just be aware that if you're testing something out and you're like, hey, it works for me, and it doesn't work for somebody else, it might be because of user permissions. So Islandora, in a nutshell, would be the idea that you want to store files along with metadata. Store the metadata in nodes, and we link media special field. That field's name is media of. We'll be talking about it a lot. We can also organize content into collections using the member of field. I'm just going to put. So, okay, a few other things that we want to be able to do in Islandora are create derivatives of the files that we upload. So that includes a lot of stuff like extracted text or thumbnails, and present your content in the right viewer. So PDFs show up in a PDF.js viewer in the browser. You can read the PDF, scroll all the pages, search within the PDF, etc. But your audio and video files will show up in, their own appropriate way. And Islandora allows you to optionally store your stuff into Fedora. So we'll jump into the first part, making content, unless there's any questions or comments. I'll try to pause every section change just to get feedback. The basics of Drupal content is that it's all managed using the Drupal admin menu. That's the thing at the very, very top of your screen when you're logged into Drupal. If you can, navigate to manage content. So if you're probably using the install profile, so you've got this weird green bar and gray bar at the top, that's the Drupal admin menu. The thing that's far to the left, that's black on dark gray that you can't read, says manage. And it makes the row below show up. Then the first one on the row below is content. Then if you go to add content and add a repository item, you'll see the rest of this page. And those are the fields that you can fill out in this node. A lot deeper than I was able to, but there are a ton of different field types in Drupal. Some of them include string, files, entity reference fields, EDTF date fields, and some fields behave very differently than others because of settings, like that they're repeatable or not. We will go into these a little more later. So if you are filling out that form, I want you to be aware there's a couple of magic fields that are set up in repository item in the install profile. In Islandora defaults, there's only one magic field. In the install profile, there are two. These are resource type, which shows up near the top. Let's go up here. Yeah, you can see resource type right there. And it's a dropdown, and the dropdown values come from a taxonomy. I didn't show field model, but that's the other one, and that's really far below. Now, the way that the Born Digital install profile is designed to work is according to this chart, which is in the Born Digital user guide for their sites. Essentially, you have to set those two fields and possibly a third field to the appropriate measures in order to get the correct display behavior that you expect. It's very complicated. In my opinion, it's very overly complicated, but it is documented. So if you click on the link to the Born Digital User Guide, you can see how these different fields interact. For instance, if you are making a book, parent of pages, you just set resource type to collection and the Islandora model to paged content. And then it will display in the default display mode, but it'll also show you a view of the pages. Up on the chat here. Okay. That's definitely the guy to go to for like ISLE and setting these things up questions. All right, one more gotcha as you're filling out the form, if you're filling out the form. The linked agent field is one of the entity reference fields. You can see by the little circle at the end of the bar that it's doing an autocomplete. So it's searching inside Drupal's database for things that match what you're typing in. If you start typing somebody's name here because they're the author of the book in hand, and that person is not already in your taxonomy, this will not let you save. You need to go to that taxonomy and add the person's name there first, and then you can use it in this form. There are complicated reasons for this, but it is how this works right now. Okay, I got some yeses, so I'll. It's Brandon, the slides are posted online. Yes, I put the link in the IslandoraCon 2022 chat. Okay, so linked agents in land could take three types: corporations, families, and people's names. So when we made this into Islandora 2, in controlled access terms, which is the module that created the linked agent field type, it was decided that those would be separate vocabularies. So you have your vocabulary of corporations, your vocabulary of families, and your vocabulary of people. This field can pull from any of them. But one option is like, okay, so if you want to make new entries on the fly, which vocabulary should they go into? It's really difficult to move them once you've already put them into a vocabulary, because the different vocabularies can have different fields and what's in one might not fit into the other. So it was decided that you just wouldn't be able to, add new terms on the fly. You'd have to go to whichever vocabulary added there first and whatever. If you're setting up a site and you don't like this, you can totally change it, make it send them to person or whatever, but then, you'll have to have a workflow for dealing with the corporate names that got stuck in there by accident. Or you could just make one vocabulary for agents and not differentiate between people, corporate, or family names. So it's all modeling. If you're able to fill out that big long form and save it, and didn't give you red like validation errors, then you've made Drupal content. Sweet. It's going to have a URL. I'm going to call this a canonical URL for every Drupal node. It's like /node, your Drupal site.com /node/the node ID. So that number is really important. It identifies the node uniquely within Drupal, and it gets referred to a lot in things like views and other places. You can't see that because on the install profile, they use path auto to generate URL aliases. So if you've made a node, it has some like nice human readable URL, like /Islandora/ the title of my node. You'll also see, I'm just going to pull up the sandbox. Great. So what it usually looks like is Islandora-page-10/page-10. That's the URL alias. It shows up here as the permalink as well. But if you go in and change the title, you will change the permalink. There's also this add to any. It's a module. It makes these social links. It's cool. You can turn it on or off in configuration. I'll show you that later. So having created a node, the next step in attaching your nodes and media are to make media. In Drupal land, they say media are reusable files. The intention is that you just upload your file once and you can put it on any node you want or any other type of content, you know, to show somebody's smiling face, like in the sidebar, in the footer, or wherever it needs to be. But Islandora envisions media as kind of being owned by a node or belonging to a node. We haven't really worked out the terminology, but there's this field called media of, not member of, like I put on the slide, media of, that drives a lot of Islandora behaviors. So if you're going to attach some media to an Islandora node, the easiest way is to use this media tab on the node. When I say on the node, I mean, so you've loaded the nodes page. And you click on media. And here you see a list of the media objects that belong to that node. So it's fairly easy to confuse this media list with the global media list, which is under Manage Content Media. If you don't have much in your site, they're going to look about the same. But they are very different. This one includes media from all different parts of your website. And this one only shows you things that are property of that node. It also shows you the media use that's been attached to those individual media. And we'll get into that. So if you're going to add some media, the media tab above the list of media has a section to add media. Batch upload has been broken for it was a recent update, I think, so I'm sure we'll get it fixed soon, but it's not working. So try add media. And choose a media type. So these are different configured media bundles, media types, that are configured to work with Islandora. So all of these have the media of field on them. If you make a new media type and you don't add the media of field, it will not show up on this page. Supposing you're adding some content, don't use fits technical metadata. That's a derivative type that will get added later automatically. And don't use remote video because it doesn't actually do very many Islandora-y things. And don't use extracted text either, because for when OCR or PDF to text runs and throws your text, add a new media attached to the node.
Obvious. So text and...
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. So file. There's a few different types, right? Audio. You can kind of figure out what goes there. Document. Stuff such as a PDF. So I think it also accepts things like Word documents and Excel sheets and the open office versions of those. File image we use for like web-friendly images. So bitmap type things, JPEGs, GIFs, they work with image. If you have a large image, unfortunately, we still can't put that into like the same box as images. We need to put JP2s and TIFFs into file. But we do have some logic in contexts that will do image type things to those images that you're putting into a file media type. Okay. I'm screwing this one up because there's already media on this, so I don't want to do too bad of things. If I were to proceed, derivatives would overwrite the existing files attached to this node. So I'm going to back out quickly and make a dummy object. All right, what type should we make? Scrolling all the way down to model, selecting. I think this will work, even though the Born Digital and manuals tells me that I'm supposed to select still image if I'm making an image. It actually doesn't make a difference, but I'll do that in any case to be compliant. And maybe, yeah, I'll select OpenSeaDragon. We're adding media. Instead, needs to be file. I have a spare TIFF that I'm always using to upload to test out TIFFs. Let's check out, what am I saying about this? Okay, so when you're filling out the media thing, the name field is just like title, but for media, they call it name. If you're making an image, they'll make an alternative text field mandatory. It should be a description of the image. It should not be the title, but that's what auto completes. Under media use, you get to select from one of these taxonomy terms. If you select original file, then derivatives will happen and probably things that you will expect. If you select a different type, then it probably all of this stuff is, we'll expand context and things later in the session. When I'm making a media this way, the media of field is already filled out. That's awesome because sometimes it can be annoying to figure out which named thing in your repository you're looking for. But because I came from the media tab, it's pre-filled out and I can just leave that as it is. Is it worth talking about the original name field? We don't have anything that populates it right now, but I believe that we are using, or at least Islandora wants to be using, a module called transliterate file names. And this kind of sanitizes file names as they're uploaded. It removes like weird Unicode characters and spaces and other things to make it a little more web friendly. However, it may be important for you in your metadata to have the original file name. So that is what goes in this big box. And it's big because, I don't know, you might have an entire file path to it, or it might be a very, very long file name. I think Seth Shaw has something that writes to this, but I'm not certain. Right, so once you've created a media, and I'll just finish with this. land on a media list. This is not the one for that object that I started on. So in order to get back to my object, I need to go through a little bit of a maze. So I click on the file that I just created. Don't even show it. Okay, fine. I'll go to content because it's here at the top. Click on super test.
There's a way to cheat.
How do you cheat?
Hit back a bunch of times.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
It does bring you back, and then you just refresh your page.
So I'm on the nodes page. It turns out that the media that contains this file is also called supertest, but right now I can tell because that looks like a node's URL alias, and I can tell because of the children and parents tabs on here that I'm actually on the node. And it's showing it in the OpenSeaDragon viewer because I selected OpenSeaDragon. And because it's an image. And then scroll down, I can see the very little metadata that I didn't add, and the Fedora URI.
One other thing, if the image doesn't show up immediately, IIIF is doing a lot of caching in the background that first time. So be a little patient if you're working on your local machine and wondering why it takes a second or two to come up. That's not once it's seeded that cache, it's super quick. But until that happens, it may tax your computer for a second while it's trying to process it.
See derivatives. Let's see derivatives. So on this media list, yeah, great. We've got supertest, which was the original file, and then a service file was created, a fits file was created, a thumbnail was created, which has a very different naming structure, but that's been changed in defaults. And yeah, you can see their media uses there. Is there any questions? It's configured to automatically happen. We can change how that works and what happens, and we'll show that in a sec. Okay, so here we go. Derivatives. They use these two friendly little guys, alpaca and crayfish. Contexts is where we set them up so they happen automatically. And in Islandora and standard Islandora, they make use of the media use vocabulary. So this came from PCDM, I believe. Yeah. And the idea that you would have attached to one digital object multiple different files, which are thumbnails or service files or other things. All right, so seeing the media on the objects page, we already did that. In this case, it was showing with the OpenSeaDragon viewer. And I talk about the long way around, or just click back a bunch of times, that's fair. And here's a quick diagram of an Islandora object with a bunch of different media. I call this the standard Islandora model. Each file is in its own media, and that media is media of the same node. So you've got that nice list of media entities in your media tab. We call it the multi-file media model. In this, all the derivatives go onto the same media object as the original file. And the advantages to this are you have less stuff cluttering up your media list. It's easier for viewers when you need to combine different things like a transcript file plus a video file. And it makes it easier, I think, to index. And we developed it here at UPEI when we were working on the research data management project. And our objects were data sets. and we wanted them to be like a researcher deposited. So a data set usually contains, some data files, whether it's a CSV or a zip, and then a data dictionary, so some documentation about it, and they all need to be stored together. We didn't want to make researchers who aren't familiar with Islandora create a parent object and 3 different child objects and link them all together properly, because we knew that was never going to work. So we tried to put everything on one node. So having like different, that data set plus the data dictionary plus the video that went with it would all be on the same node as different multi-file media objects. And each one, depending on its type, would have its appropriate derivatives. And you can do Islandora. There are some ways where the Islandora interface kind of lends itself better to the other model, but that's the way the interface is developed. All right, so we talked about creating content. That's adding stuff through the interface. Are there any questions? So part 2 is the complex objects. Do you want to take?
No,
I'm
all
right.
On chat.
So there's kind of 4 types that you can use here in the install profile. They're all based on the same mechanism. So you've got collections, which I needed to define it. You probably understand, like you want to create a collection of your objects and see all of them in one place. Paged content, i.e. a book or a newspaper issue or something like that, where you've got individual pages to put together in some order as essentially an ordered collection that we're calling a book. Then there's newspaper, which adds another layer, because you've got your newspaper title kind of object. Underneath that are newspaper issue objects, and underneath those are pages. And newspapers have a way of showing up in the install profile that is very much like the Islandora 7 way of showing newspapers. So you can kind of drill down by date and see what issues you have. And then compound is kind of the wild card. It groups together various objects that are perhaps otherwise unrelated or you want to show together for some reason. There's an optional ordering, and I actually have no idea what's supposed to be the deal with up. It appears the parent vanishes, in the sense that if you go to the parent, you're first child.
Yes, this is true.
Is this correct? Is this what it's supposed to do?
As far as I know.
That's
the
cool.
behavior I have also seen.
All right. So it's a set of siblings without an obvious parent, but they are connected to a parent to link them together behind the scenes.
Yes.
Cool. A little more detail about collections. I'm pretty sure you have to mark them as collection in that resource type field and model field. It, in the install profile, displays a view, a Solr view, that has facets. So those things on the left-hand sidebar, and also has some pretty awesome like user control. You can select 10, 25, 50 items per page, etc. And you can even change how it's sorted. Not sure that that makes as much sense in a collection view because you're not searching for anything, so relevance is anyway. Paged content shows up like this. If you mark the parent as collection / paged content per the thing, I'm not sure which one is which, and then you will view the children in this OpenSeaDragon viewer. So as Dawn mentioned, the OpenSeaDragon viewer works with Cantaloupe, which is a special image server that does that like deep zooming, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Provides you tile sources. And to make this lovely book show up, we have to send Cantaloupe / OpenSeaDragon a manifest. So this is a XML structured list of all the objects that we want to show up. And then they, can show up in the little media viewer down there. And OpenSeaDragon has so many options. Oh my gosh, we've implemented like most of them. So if you go to manage configuration,
Oh, I don't remember it. Something
media, OpenSeaDragon, if you find the OpenSeaDragon management page, the thing to show that little film strip at the bottom is like hidden deep in there with a bunch of other stuff. So if you've installed Islandora manually and didn't get the default configs, it may take a while. It took me a while to figure out how to get that thumbnail strip to show up.
If you're doing this manually, though, there is something to note. You really need to make sure your thumbnails are being properly generated. It's going to point to a different one, and it'll actually load the full-size image as thumbnails. Learn that the hard way. So if you ever have a performance issue on that screen, that's the first thing to check, to make sure all the children have thumbnails properly declared.
To match up with Islandora 7, there's also this little pages tab. Yeah, which lets you see the pages individually. I'm not sure if you need to navigate to them, but it's really cool. And that's provided by the install profile. And if you were to scroll down, like I didn't have enough space in the screenshot, but if you were to scroll down, the book's metadata would be like pretty full there. Should just mention collections don't show the metadata right now. So you need to get that to display some other way, or just go in and make it show. Okay, newspapers. Calling the title like University of Prince Edward Island Cadre needs to be marked collection newspaper. The issues are collection / publication issue. This field that they're ordered by is the date issued field. It's an EDTF date field. We'll go into field types in a sec. But it accepts all sorts of really cool structured dates. You could say the date is approximate. You could give a date range. You can say spring of 2022 if you wanted to. You could say spring in the Southern Hemisphere of 2022. You can encode a whole lot of stuff in there. And some of it, including those like spring, fall, winter and stuff, works in this newspaper view, which is great if you're using it for things like journal publications that publish seasonally. And then compound objects. Here's the film strip at the bottom that shows the siblings that are attached in this. And you can either be on the first sibling or on the second sibling. There's no way to see the parent except to go to either object's parent tab. Other feature, thank you. Now we know.
I actually just posted a link to that with an example from the Born Digital demo site in the IslandOraCon Slack channel.
Amazing, thank you. One other thing I noticed is that the example on the sandbox, which has 2 audio files as a compound object together, you don't see any way to navigate between them because this film strip thing runs on thumbnails. So that might be a bug that we could fix. So sum up all of these types of complex objects, use field member of. That's this parent-child relationship that we've got really built into Islandora. You'll see the children on the parents on the children tab, and in the install profile, you'll see the parents on the parent tab. As a side note, field member of being present on a content type makes that content type Islandora. There are some ways you can use that in contexts to say, like, if my node is an Islandora object, then do this. and in views, hopefully if my pull request went through, to also say like, show me all the Islandora objects in my repo. So this field member of is in like this parent-child nesting is super important and needs to be on all your Islandora objects, even if they're not nesting. I have a site like that, but we just put the field on anyway. Any questions?
Huge collections don't have parents.
So in the install profile, that browse all collections link, yeah, that shows, does it narrow to collections? It
It's
shows
just
things that have no parents.
No, it should
No, it
be
shows collections that have no parents.
Yeah.
So top level collections.
There's a few other settings too, like it's got to be published, it's got to be a collection, and it, and yeah, and I think those are the three I just put in the pull request to narrow or knock out something else. So it's just those three.
Yeah.
Adjust what the parameters are for what makes it to that as well.
So we have many years of meeting minutes from an organization with setting them up as a newspaper. So we haven't organized the date we suggested or focus on naming conventions. Ali, I'm not sure. If you think people are going to be going in by date, then that would make sense. Is there a serial content type, or does magazine with multiple issues go into newspaper? I don't think anyone has done anything different for serials. So they could go into newspaper, but if you have a use case for serials that isn't met by that, it'd be really useful if you wanted to make a use case in the queue, where anyone with a GitHub account is able to record, feature requests, bug reports, use cases, other things, is under the Islandora organization and the documentation repo. And then it's the issues tab. We have 535. A lot of these are like meta issues, big epic projects that will possibly never finish. But you're definitely welcome to put stuff in there. Thank you, Nicole, for the link to paged and complex content. Stephen, what about serial content types such as number and volume? I can't remember if we put number and volume in Islandora repository item content type. Thank you, Yamil, for posting how to create a GitHub issue.
I was going to mention Ali's comment about sorting. You can do all that in the view. Her last question, the last part of her question.
Okay.
Yeah, if you want to sort your collection by a certain, it gets a little complicated if you want to do it by one per collection, like sort this collection by or another collection, it could get kind of complicated. But if you know that all your collections you want to sort by date, you can do that pretty quickly in modifying the view.
We're jumping into the next section a little bit. I'm going into the manage structure content types for repository item to see what fields we have enabled. I know we talked about stuff like volume and number. It's not in there. I can tell you the reason for that, but it won't make anybody happy. The data interest group was tasked with making like, how should this Islandora, how can we get our data from mods into Islandora 8? And when we were told to put it into Islandora 8, we were told to put it into RDF. Now, if you're going to make like a citation thing in RDF, the strict right way to do it is to model as a separate object your publication. and to model as a separate object an issue. So those like volumes or volumes and issues and stuff like that. So the volume number would be like on a different entity, and same with the issue number. We didn't want to make separate Islandora objects for each of those things, when they're just trying to add, especially for like an institutional repository, when you're basically doing like a one-off article. We want this one article, but not the rest of the journal. If you want to add volume and number to your Islandora objects, go right ahead. If you want to make separate content types for these things with those, go right ahead. Put them in this one, possibly. I think it's too long already, but maybe it would be useful for people. We'll probably cover part 3, maybe a little part 4. Managing content types and fields. So we'll talk about the fields themselves, and then how they display in the form to the editor, and then how they display to the public or everybody else. So we talked about fields on nodes, like those fields on a repository item, but they can actually be attached to any entity type, including users and taxonomy terms and paragraphs and other things. They're actually attached to the specific bundle. So bundle is a generic word for content type or media type or taxonomy vocabulary, which is to say that like the repository object content type has different fields than the article content type. You probably know this. Fields come in different types. They provide the display options, the form options, and potentially data validation. You can mark them as required. They show up with that little red star, and they can be repeatable. So if you have seen the page for repository item, like we saw, tons of fields, not a lot of help text with editing them, not a lot of grouping or ordering of them together. Like maybe some sections seem to be ordered together, but it's not like doesn't have an easy overview. And this is all a combination of the field settings and the widget settings. And widgets mean how stuff appears on forms. So this is the configure fields place where we were just under structure, content types, repository item, manage fields. It shows all my fields alphabetically. It also shows the machine names of the field. So this is how the field shows up on repository item as abstract, but underneath the hood, it's field _ abstract. You can change these to be very different if you needed to. And then on the right, options are to edit this field. Oops, I just clicked it. I was trying to click the drop down. Edit the field or edit the storage settings, or delete the whole field altogether. We'll talk mostly about the first two. Editing the field is editing the field on that content type. Editing the storage settings is like that field's base storage. And a field can be attached to multiple different content types. So you could have the same field on repository item and on article, but it could show up with a different label on each of them. So I was very thorough when making these slides. When you go in to edit them, that's the label. Help text is like what appears right below the field, might help you, add the correct values. One thing that I want to do is add a link to the EDTF specification under EDTF fields, because Otherwise, it's really difficult to know how to format your approximate dates and things like that. It's a contrib module that's installed with Islandora default. Is it default? Might just be the install profile, I'm not sure. It's field permissions. And so this way you can set up a little matrix of who's allowed to create, edit, and view each individual field. And you can set a default value if you want to. I don't think that's very popular. It often does more harm than it's intended to. Oh, and if it was a file field, you'd be allowed to set the allowed file extensions. And every upload field has that set up there. And it's not set up, it's not like a property of the core field. It's just the way that the field appears on that content type.
There's a time where it's not going to let you edit the storage once something's been assigned.
Yes. In fact, I'll just add that. If you go into manage storage settings, then they're called field settings depending on how you get there. But these are the like core things. How many values is this field allowed to take? If it's a file field, where do you want the files to go? Some things, especially how many members, how many objects this file can, values a field can take, cannot be changed once there's data in your site. So you're kind of set with that. So make sure you choose something good to start with. And these apply across bundles.
Well, there is a way to change it, sort of. It's very destructive, though. You remove it, then you lose all the value that was in that field for all objects. And then you can add it back, the exact same field, but before it'll let you do it, that field is cached, the actual ID for it is. So you have to clear your cache, otherwise it'll just tell you that there's a naming conflict. So if you just try to add it back in and add it to multi-value, that's the way to do it, but I wouldn't do it on a website.
All right, so widgets let you enter data on the form. They depend on the field's type. Some of them are really cool. Like there's one for geolocation where you just have a map and you can kind of slide it around and then click somewhere, and it stores the coordinates for where you clicked. But sometimes they're really boring. It's just a text field. You can also, on the manage forms, so this is up here, manage form display section at the bottom. That's called disabled, and it hides those fields from the user. So if you don't want it to show up on the form at all, just drag it down to that section. And yeah, each widget can give you a very different experience for how your fields work in the. We talked about widgets, which are on the form. Now, formatters are to the public. They're how the stored data gets displayed to the user. Again, you can configure them really specifically. So that's under manage display. So each here format is the title of the column, and those are the formatters that you're able to pick from. Change what's called the view mode. And these are the things that run along the top, like basic, binary, collection, compound, member. Each of those has a totally different order of your fields, set of fields that show up, different formatters. All of that stuff is flexible and is saved per view mode. And supposing you have like a geo-coordinate field where it's just saved your coordinates in text, you might have a formatter that shows that location on a map. Oh yeah, each of these probably has a setting. So at the far right, there's a little gear, and that gives you way more options for the specific formatter that you've chosen. So I could choose whether to show my title as H1, H2, whatever, and I can add some extra classes to it. I could link it to itself, link to the content. When you're designing the view mode for the page itself, it probably doesn't need to link to itself. But if you're designing a view mode to be used in views or in some other way, then you might want to use that link to the content so that when you see a grid of all your different nodes, the titles can be blue links to each object. It'll always work even if you have your special characters and your things. Thank you, William.
These are values that are ultimately passed to a twig, and then the twig can ultimately determine where they're at on the screen. So you don't have
Oh my
to.
gosh.
You don't-
Okay, Don's going to talk about twig.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, I didn't think about it before, so I'm sorry. I didn't put it in the
Okay.
slides, but the values in the fields, these individual values, kind of think of them as not, although you can set the order here, these get piped to a twig file, and the twig file can ultimately determine what goes on with these. So you put the title at the bottom if you wanted to, even though it's at the top here. So twig overrides are way outside the scope of what we're planning on talking about, but to know that this is just the mechanism to get the data to the twig file so that it can be manipulated further by your front end developer if you have one, if you're lucky enough. So you can offload all that responsibility to them. So yeah, that was really it.
Sorry, I see a question in the chat. Can you show how to edit the label? Never mind, sorry. All right, glad you saw it. Sorry, it's hard to cover everything at the same time. What are classes? They are CSS classes. So work is, I think this is the default. Default view mode, which is the one that I just changed because it won't have affected any other one. But I have opened up the view source in this website. And if I select super test, but that H1 though, that was set there. If you're, okay, this actually might be, I wasn't planning on going deep into this, but you can find out a lot of really interesting stuff from classes. For instance, now I've realized my thing didn't show up. I'm probably not on the default view mode. So I'm gonna kind of scroll up to the, to see like as big of a div as I can find that contains my node and see if I can give me any clues as to what view mode I'm looking at.
Titles are different. Is that the one that uses it too?
What do you mean?
Titles are processed through Drupal's core quite a bit differently than any of the other fields.
Oh.
So you might.
Okay, so if I go up one, is that title stuff?
You should be able to click in there and hit Command F and find it.
Search for though.
Oh, the name you just gave it?
Oh, here we go. Okay. So it's the article tag, which has 1 million classes, but one of them is node -- view mode open sea dragon. So I'm on view mode open sea dragon. All of these classes can be used by your CSS, Potentially, I think they're added by Twig. Yeah, so they can be used by CSS to have things show up differently, display different ways, have different sizes and stuff like that. Yeah, it's, I knew this was going to happen. You have to find a piece of content that renders in the selected view mode, and I didn't. I found one that rendered in OpenSeaDragon. Okay, so other stuff that shows up in the manage display. Oh yeah, on any node on the install profile. I'm not sure what module this is. I've seen it somewhere before, but there's a manage display tab, and it jumps you from like the content area to this structure area where you're now like back at structure, content types, repository item. Doing this. Oh yeah, to show you the things that are not fields that show up here. Okay, so add to any is not a field. Same with EVA, PDF.js, parent pages and current object, links, scroll down, Fedora URI, and file checksum. They don't have any formatters because they're pseudo fields. They show up on this interface so that you can place them and do stuff with them. They don't really belong to the object in the same way, and they're not as easy or they're impossible to edit. Add to any, and this parent page is current, and the Fedora URI came from modules. The EVAs, which there are a lot of EVA things that like show up in here, those are all set up as views. So we'll go into that stuff later. The EVA views and pseudo fields have no formatters, etc. It can be a little bit frustrating to figure out like where they came from, unless you are familiar with what put them there. All right, I really wanted to go into all the different field types, but realized that that was an impossible task. When you go to create a new field, it gives you these categories. So there's general, which really should be called something else because it's kind of a hodgepodge of things that just take direct values, maybe complex values, things like that. There's a section for numbers. So you can do yourself some integers, decimals, where it's stored like before and after the decimal point, and floating point numbers, which lets you store really big or really small numbers. Reference fields are super important. They link to other Drupal content that's on the same site. Reference fields include file fields, like file, but also image and media track. Media track is an Islandora thing. There are a bunch of different types of text. I didn't explain them all, but text plain is your like super simple one-off text box. Text plain long is like that original file one. It was like a big text box. And text formatted long with summary is that thing when you want to write a blog and insert some like photos, and then like with summary means that you can configure its trimmed view. By default, it'll be like the first however many characters, but you can rewrite it to be a special, you know, preview of your text block if you want to. And then typed relation. So a warning, when you're here and you're adding fields under manage fields, it's really easy to like make an entity reference thing that's accidentally a typed relation. But these are very different from the ones that show up in reference. Under typed relation, you also need to set up a list of types that this link could have. I wanted to go a little bit into the field types and widgets and formatters, but it turns out there was a lot and I didn't have time to transcribe them all. But like even Boolean has a number of different ways that you can have it formatted and displayed to the user, including custom to show, you know, something or nothing or whatever. Comments and dates are also field types that you can, at least dates you can customize to display in different ways. And these are the three kind of different types of taxonomy reference fields. I mentioned the widget can really change how it looks and feels. So for resource type, you have that drop down, which shows you about a dozen values. Genre can take, hopefully maybe in your site, you've got like hundreds of different genres, but it uses an autocomplete. And then because we only have a very few in display hints, we have those as radio buttons. So they're all the same type of field in the core. It's just they're displayed as different widgets. Oh, and genre is also configured to allow you to create new terms on the fly. None of these others will let you do that. So like very different user experience. All right, so here's the typed relation field. And this is an Islandora thing. The field is defined in the controlled access terms module, in case you're curious. And it takes a link, like usually to a taxonomy term or some other content, and a type. So this type is configured in the field settings, like the basic ones, not the storage ones, using kind of like key pipe value syntax. The key is what gets stored in the database. The value is what gets shown to the user. This because we wanted to use all these different types of contributors to our content. We didn't want to have 100 different fields on our node, one for each of these types. So this typed relation field allows us to just have a single field and categorize its type with this dropdown that we configure. Another cool field type that we made is called authority link. So this is on things like the genre taxonomy. And it lets you enter an external URI, lets you customize how that is rendered as a link, and lets you choose from a dropdown which kind of vocabulary that link is from. So this way you can, if you wanted to, find things in your repository that used Library of Congress genre form terms genres or different genres if you have different ones available. Yes, the EDTF date field. You can add like normal Drupal dates, make you go all the way year, month, day. And it's like super fixed. Sometimes if you wanted to, you can add a time as well, but it won't let you add anything with ambiguity that goes greater than the day. But EDTF lets you add whatever you want. So it could just be a year and a month, a range of years. So that's done using a slash. And it could be like a year to a year month. So it's super flexible. It even has this value signs like tilde for uncertain. There's a different one for approximate and a third one for uncertain and approximate. So it's very designed for cataloging metadata people. When you enter your text in, it gets validated. So it's like, yes, this is a valid EDTF style string of numbers. And the formatter lets you render it however you want. Meaning if you want your month spelled out, you can do that. If you want to show it in this order versus that order, you can set that up. However, when it's being presented on the form for someone to add, like the widget, it doesn't provide very much help text. It looks just like a text field until you get the validation errors. Are there any questions about fields, managing fields, formatters, widgets? Yes, Paige.
So you said for the fly, is that because it only pulls from one taxonomy?
The question was about the genre field and pulling. We can create it on the fly because it was pulling from only one taxonomy. So making it create on the fly was an acceptable choice. Oh, we're having some discussion in the chat about Excel sheets. That's awesome. Yes. Collecting questions or anything like that as we go. Feel free to add them, ask them. We'll probably have some time to kind of do more of a free-form Q&A. So if there are things that you would like to know that we haven't even touched anything close to, and you're like, is this an appropriate question? Yes, we'd be happy to hear it. Contexts. Yeah, we use them for derivatives, display, and indexing, and we'll go through all of those. So context is a Drupal contrib module, and I mention this because it's not Drupal 10 ready yet, which is kind of a red flag, yellow flag. We've got a little while before we need to be on Drupal 10. But context lets you do if-then logic. So there are conditions. I think it's a Drupal thing outside of context, because I think conditions are used in block placement as well. Yeah. But your if statements are these conditions, and it might be like if the node is of type repository item, and then their thens are provided by the reactions, which are actions. No, they're not always actions. Sorry. So that might be like then, if that happens, then place a special block on the content section of my page. Now, Islandora does a lot of work to extend contexts. The stuff that we're doing with it are not what it was designed to do, but it works very well for our purposes. We just have to write a lot of code to make it happen. The other awesome thing about this is that there's a user interface to go in and edit the contexts. So you can go and see why things are happening or why they're not. It's not hidden in code, it's exposed to you. That's great. So Islandora adds tons of context conditions. So like parent node has term, on file has file system. Times that contexts are executed. So we make contexts kind of fire when you save, update, or delete nodes, media, and files. And there are tons of new reactions that we've created, like index this thing in Fedora, make derivatives, etc. So, contexts for derivatives. If you have Islandora available, you can follow along. If you want to use sandbox.islandora.ca like me, you can follow along too. I won't try to do anything too disruptive. The field cut question. I'm sorry, I missed the chat. Here we go. Is the field, I see the field that is hidden, but I do not see how to make it viewable to the public. I'll check back with you, Nicole, after the session. Okay. Contexts. So contexts are under structure. Even though they're kind of like configuration of your site, it's under structure. If you click on context, you'll see a huge list of different contexts that we have all set up. The first ones that we're talking about are contexts for derivatives. So here we go. We've got audio derivatives, page derivatives, PDF derivatives, video derivatives, and image derivatives. Earlier, so I'll stay with the image paradigm. So if I go here for edit on the right-hand side, this interface shows me the details about my context. So this is just administrative stuff at the top. Under conditions are the things that are required. So media has term with original file, media has term with URI, original file. The reason that we say term with URI and not just term is because under the hood, original file, i.e. taxonomy term 19, is being identified using its external URI, which is like pcdm.org/something/original file, #original file. And the reason that we're using that is that it makes this context easier to save as like a big blob of configuration, send to somebody else and have them load it up in their system. Because in their system, original file might not be taxonomy term number 19, maybe 27. And so by using that, find me whichever one you have that has external URI original file, these contexts can be a little more portable. All right, so we've got 3 conditions here, and they all, because they require all conditions is checked, so they all need to be in place. Second one is parent node for media has term image. So I think when I was creating my node, I selected image and image in the resource type and field. I guess 30, it doesn't tell you, and this is one of my other peeves, it doesn't tell you which vocabulary this is from, and it could be from any vocabulary, and we have like the same terms in different vocabularies, so it's confusing. But I'm pretty sure that this refers to the field model, which I had set as image. And then the third one is media type. The media type that's selected is remote video. That's not what I added. But down below, notice that negate this condition is checked. So as long as the media type is not remote video and the parent node has image and the media has original file, then here's what happens. We get these derivative actions. So the 2 that are selected are generate a service file from an original file and generate a thumbnail from an original file. Now that's 2. Now that plus our original file makes 3 things, but I remember there were 4 in my media list. So at the very bottom, technical metadata on ingest is its own. And basically this one applies to all media that you set in, as long as it's not remote video. It's going to try to generate technical metadata for you. So these are all configurations that you can change. They come with Islandora defaults or the install profile. And you can set them up. I think I'm gonna go. Initial gotchas with this are that derivatives automatically happen when you change the media, when you save the media. They don't happen when you save the node. And derivatives will only get done if you update the media and the file has changed. So if you're like, oh, my derivative didn't work. Oh, right, add original file. So you go back and add original file. But you didn't change the file in like the main media storage. It'll be like, oh, nothing's changed. I'm not gonna do anything. Or if you're like, oh, right, my node had to have all those special terms on it. And you go back and fix that and you save your node, it won't happen. But luckily for you, there's another way other than contexts to make these derivatives happen. Okay. It's pretty simple. You've already seen it. It's this big list at manage content. So I just wanted to manage content. And this is all our repository items and other stuff. And then go to this action dropdown. And this shows all the configured derivatives that you could possibly do. It also shows a bunch of other stuff, like do you want to edit the node? Do you want to delete it? You want to publish or unpublish or whatever. But you can execute derivatives from here and they will work. So long as it'll try its best. It doesn't do all that checking. Like it doesn't try to evaluate the context. It'll just like try to run the derivative for you. You might end up sending like an image file to a video processing server if you selected the wrong combination of stuff. But you know, it'll really try its best to do these derivatives that you asked for. And as we're talking about derivatives as actions, because they're here under this label called action, you can go in and change how the derivatives are configured as actions. And this is under configuration, system, actions. So here's a list of every action that Drupal knows about, including the derivatives. If we were to find one of the derivative ones, they're under node. So we can take a look at how the thumbnail, for instance, the service file is being generated. So if I click configure here, this is really under the hood for these derivatives. But if you're like, why are my thumbnails like 100 pixels? Like nobody can deal with a file that small. Or if you're wondering why the file is set to MP4 instead of whatever preservation file extension you wanted to use. That's here in the derivative configuration. So generally leave the queue name. The ones that we've configured, I'll start with Islandora-connector. The last little bit, Houdini, is the code name for the crayfish that does Houdini image processing. It's image magic. There are like 5 other ones. But we basically, we don't use too many of them. Go into the derivatives that are already set up and they'll kind of show you how to do it. If you're stuck, then ask your IT person like what queues they set up. Okay, so the event type is stuck at generate derivative, that's fine. The source term original file says I want to find me an original file, and that's going to be the file that I send out for derivative processing. Derivative term as service file means when I get my derivative back, I'm going to save it as a media tagged service file. Because when I get my file back, I'm going to save it as an image media called service file. MIME type is when I'm telling Houdini or Image Magic, please make me a JPEG. The extra arguments are when I tell Houdini or Image Magic, please do me some thumbnail processing with the size and this density and these backgrounds and all this stuff. I'm pretty sure those have been paid for by mistakes, as in if you had a very weird like transparent PNG or something, then like the background white is going to really help you. I don't know what all these do, but I'm sure that they're for a reason. And then derivatives are able to write your files to any file system that's available in Drupal. So that, oh my God, it's 12:02. Okay, I'll just finish this page. You can set them here to write to the public file system if you don't really care about storing your derivatives in Fedora. You could set it to write to Fedora if you want to keep all your derivatives and original files together. And you can set the file path to say how it's going to get named. Lunch now. I'm sorry for going over time. I'll leave the chat and the Zoom on, I think. Like I'll turn off the video, but I'll leave the Zoom on just so we can kind of not get everybody out. But we'll meet back here in an hour for more about contexts and other things. And if there are things that you're like, Rosie, you didn't put this in the agenda, come up to me at lunch and we'll talk about it. Folks, did everybody have a good lunch hour? Yes, or challenges with getting things installed? Okay. Forcing a laptop to stay awake with 2 toothpicks in the eye sockets. Excellent. Want to chat after the session about why it's not working? Folks who had some thumbs downs. Okay, could be the Wi-Fi. Well, we'll plow forward. If you want to use the sandbox, go ahead. I heard there was an error in the sandbox just now in Firefox. Did
It
that get
looks
sorted
fine
out?
to me now, so.
All right.
Just been a hiccup.
Hopefully that was just a hiccup. Let us know if like you're trying something and it goes weird. I'm trying to look it. Or you're local. Irritating. Apparently, if you, for the folks online, if you download a developer version of Firefox, you may be able to override the security certificate thing when there isn't a okay to proceed. Are you able to try a different browser? These are things that are frustrating. All right, we're going to continue on talking about various types of contexts in Islandora. And so next up, we just talked about contexts for derivatives. Now we're doing contexts for display. These are where that specific combination, like that table I showed you before, of field model and field resource type come into play. So when you're doing a context for display, it can do one of the following 3 things. Change the view mode of the node. Often this is one with a specific like view or other thing there. Or you can use contexts to place a block in the content region of your theme. For an example, like collections use this to show a view of their children, a view that can be placed as a block. And some of the contexts set up do absolutely nothing. So you go in and you'll read carefully through all the conditions, and then you'll realize that there's no reaction set up. So those contexts are kind of useless. I'm not sure why they're there, but maybe they're there in case you wanted to set up behaviors for those things. Yeah, we're getting right into it. I want to walk you through how we tell Islandora to use PDF.js. JS is that inline PDF viewer that you've seen on some websites. And the way that we do it is through a large combination of stuff. First, when you're storing a PDF into Islandora, you can store it as a media typed digital document. You can also probably store it as a file. But those media types hold other things than just PDFs. So we're only going to want to use PDF.js in specific cases. Okay, so let's start by diving into the context. It'll tell us what we need, how we need to set it up. Yes. Okay, I didn't get the errors, but I was like, oh man, am I gonna? All right, so we navigate to structure context, always. Now we want one of the ones in the display section. Here's the PDF.js viewer. So I click edit. Conditions are node has term with URI, and the value is PDF.js. So this means that at the bottom of your node page, where it's got a section for display hints, and it'll say NA, OpenSeaDragon, PDF.js, that's where PDF.js has to be selected. The action is it changes the view mode. Changes the view mode of the node to PDF.js. So let's go see what that PDF.js view mode does. before, those are the things in manage display. So I have to go to content types, repository items, manage display. And then we see this suite of view modes across the top. Yes, it looks much nicer across the top than when it's lots of rows. So sure enough, over here is a PDF.js view mode. And it shows title, add to any parent, links, and EVA. So this PDF.js media EVA original file is what shows you the PDF viewer. How does it work? Well, it's a view. EVA is short for an entity view attachment, or maybe they just wanted to name it after Evangelion. I'm not sure. Nonetheless, you find them under views. So structure views. Control F, because there's a whole lot. And I go to PDF.js. So there's a bunch of different media EVA views. PDF.js is one of them. I'll go edit. So this view has 3 different, what is it called? Displays.
I think so. Something like that.
Displays. Basically like different versions or pages of a view. They can differ in small or large ways from each other. It depends on how you set them up. But we were told that we were getting the original file, so we'll just look at the original file. And the important part is here, where under format, when asked what is it going to show, it's showing the media as a rendered entity using the PDF.js view mode. Now, the PDF.js view mode on the media is a separate thing from the PDF.js display mode on the node. So to see how that works, we go to the media type, document, manage display, because media can have their own view modes as well, and they're in the same spot under manage display. So here's PDF.js, and it shows only one thing, the document, the file field, formatted as default viewer of PDF.js. So all of that just to get your PDF to show on your node. It can be a little fun to be playing detective. I think there's probably better ways and more efficient ways that we can do this, but we'll work on that. So right now, your context, I'll go back to the slides. Your context changes the node view mode based on these display hints. The node displays the EVA view. The EVA view shows a rendered entity using the PDF.js view mode, and the PDF.js view mode on the media shows the file with PDF.js. Real simple, I know. I'm sorry. If you have questions about how this is working, post them to the Slack or mailing list or whatever. It would probably help the developers get on my side if more people complain about it. Yeah, so that's how it works right now. What's cool about it is it's really configurable. It does, you put all the logic on the node rather than the media, which can work, but I feel like there's also a lot of ways that this could break down. So if you, forgot to put PDF.js on there, if you tried to add other media types or things like that. This is how the logics with contexts and stuff are set up right now. All right, the third type of contexts are much simpler. These index or delete. So when we talk about indexing, in this case, we're talking about into Fedora and into BlazeGraph. And you can index nodes, media, files, taxonomy terms, all sorts of stuff. You'll see this structure, context, indexing. So this all media, external files, content, taxonomy terms, these are the ones that send stuff into Fedora. Let's go into, for example, under content. I said it was simpler. There are a few things that I wanted to point out. So if your node bundle is repository item, then this will kick in. That makes sense. Index reactions include index it in Fedora and in the Drupal store. So when you save a node, all of its metadata will be transformed into RDF and sent to those places. Under delete it from Fedora and the Drupal store. So this is really how we keep things in sync. The entire node will get deleted, the entire node, the RDF source, whatever you call it in Fedora and in BlazeGraph will get deleted when you delete it in Drupal. One is called JSON LD self-reference. I might have written that name. It was something very confusing before as well. When you create the RDF, which takes the format of JSON LD, we send it to Fedora, but we want that object in Fedora to kind of know where it came from, to have the original node's ID somewhere in that Fedora object so that we can kind of connect them. That's what this self-reference predicate is. That's saying what relationship should we use between the Fedora object and the Drupal object? And we've chosen schema same as. The reason we didn't choose owl same as, which is semantically similar, is that owl same as is very strict. They must be exactly the same type and be like literally equivalent. And schema same as is a little bit looser. So we're putting that predicate there. And then the fourth one is the field containing RDF type information. We'll get into this in a second, but when you're setting up RDF mappings in the RDF module, they only let you assign one type per content type. So articles, you might have like a type predicate for article. Basic page, you get to call it a page. Repository item, well, we have repository items that are audio and video and documents and all sorts of things. So this lets us choose a field that tells you what the type is. And so we're using field model. An introduction to contexts. For us in Islandora. Are there any questions? All right, it's time to talk about Fedora. Aaron, free to chime in anytime. So why do we use Fedora? It's been part of Islandora since the beginning. Islandora started as linking your Drupal to your Fedora repository. So we want to continue that legacy, and Fedora is a really cool software. We like working with it. Fedora does some preservation things like checksums on demand. We currently need an external module, which Mark Jordan wrote, in order to interface with that so that you can get your checksum checking information right in your Drupal. But it's there. Fedora lets you store your critical content outside of Drupal. And that could be very beneficial if your Drupal gets hacked or something. Drupal's a hugely popular open source software, and it is a very common target of automated attacks. So if you lose your Drupal database, but you still have everything in Fedora, you can potentially rebuild from it. It might be very difficult, but I think you can. Fedora provides an RDF endpoint, which is super cool. I want to do like LDP stuff. I don't think we're quite there yet. We don't have the ability to put stuff in Fedora, but control who can see it. Fedora It's just when we're writing from Drupal, everything goes into Fedora and everything is accessible to anyone who can access Fedora. So if we wanted to expose it, I mean, you could, if you had a completely public repository and you didn't care who saw, all of your administrative metadata and stuff like that, you can leave your Fedora open, potentially, but I'm not sure. Yeah, I'd be very interested to know who's doing this, because Fedora is super cool, and I would like us to like integrate with it a little bit better. Yeah, I want to talk about like exposing messy metadata. The way that Drupal works when it generates RDF about a node is it includes a lot of administrative stuff that's important to Drupal. So like, this is created by user 1 admin. This was created on, August 1st, 2022. This is, last modified, whenever. Has a whole bunch of these predicates that it like forces into your RDF, but they absolutely do not describe the book that was written in 1809, Fedora. And in the RDF, the subject is the same. So the statement that this thing was created in, today, and the statement that this thing has a date issued 1809 or whatever, those have the same subject. It doesn't make sense. That's why I talk about messy metadata. Okay, and Fedora 6 uses something called the Oxford Common File Layout, which is a very cool preservation-centric, like human readable and, what am I trying to say? Recoverable, I guess, way of writing information about files to a file system. So you'll have, if your Fedora gets completely lost and you just have the stuff that's on disk, you can make sense of it. There's the way that we put RDF into Fedora, but separately, there's the way that we put files into Fedora. And for that, we use something called a module called Fly System. You'll see it around. It lets you store files in other locations than Drupal's basic public or private file systems. So Annie? Created the Fly System adapter for Fedora, so we can use it for that. But out of the box, Fly System can work with Amazon S3, Dropbox, other cool ways of storing your data. So when you load up an Islandora using Islandora defaults or the install profile, anything you upload to media gets stored in Fedora. However, derivatives, so like if you made an image, it would be an image in Fedora. When your derivatives come through, your service file and your thumbnail and stuff, those will probably live in your Drupal's public file system, because even though they are still in a media, the derivative process has a way of circumventing what you set, what's set in the UI for where you store these files. So yeah, just nice and confusing. They could be anywhere. To see where something is, you can either examine the source, so like use the developer's tools to inspect your web page, or right-click and open in a new tab. If you see the Fly System Fedora part in your URL, then it lives in Fedora. Cool. One last thing is that to write to Fedora, your Drupal user needs to be set up with the Drupal role Fedora admin. This has to do with how things are authenticated. Access control problems between Drupal and Fedora can't set up restrictions on objects. It's the same problem that has been discussed re access control. Also a problem in a Fedora-less Islandora too. Go ahead.
I haven't been really on top of your bit about how access control, especially in the bonus or just, I,
Right, so the question was like, is this question, like big questions around controlling access, a Fedora problem or just a Drupal problem? And I think the discussions that you've been hearing are probably just Drupal. To kind of summarize, there is a module called permissions by term, and it is slow at scale. So there is an alternative that uses groups. I'm not.
Oh, no, I don't think it is.
Okay, it's pretty new. And it ends up, so there is a module in Drupal called group. And Drupal group is a really awesome and rugged and complicated way of setting up different permissions on different parts of your site. You essentially create groups like clubs, and they get to see the content that's added to that group. Or there's like different levels of permissions within a group. So you're like, are you just a member of the group or are you an administrator of the group? And that might give you different like read or write permissions on the content that is in that group. And then there can be, you know, a ton of groups on your site for all the different things that you need to provide access to. As I understand it, the install profile recently has a little bit of code that lets you add content to groups by giving it a taxonomy term. So giving it a taxonomy term was the way that you did permissions using permissions by term. And so this is kind of a clone of that, trying to get similar behavior. But I think there are specific restrictions. You need to be using a field called field access terms. And you need, I think, for the group name to be the same as the group type name. Because to make this even more complicated, there are groups and there are group types. It should be feasible. I think this is really promising. I don't know about like the adding people to groups bit, if that works with it yet. Because I think Danny's intention was you just set up the group permissions for people who are not in the group, and they can see or not see the content. But I'm not sure. Like, I think it was meant, yeah, it was meant to be a drop-in replacement for permissions by term. The group module has a lot of really powerful stuff that you can do with it. I don't know how compatible that is with what's been done in the install profile.
I don't have any answers either.
this topic might be a whole second.
Oh, yeah.
Just gonna hold whatever you put in it.
The folks online, Aaron was saying that this sounds like a Drupal, not a Fedora thing. However, Whitman College had some issues with the Fedora migration and access control there. RDF metadata in Fedora. Just by sending a file into Fedora using Fly System doesn't give Fedora much metadata about it. So that's why we make media. The media and the fields on the media become metadata about the file. We also link the file in Fedora to its parent node. So do that. When you save nodes, it sends the metadata into Fedora as well. And it, in PCDM, the Portland Common Data Model, it calls it an object. That was the model that like kind of inspired the standard Islandora model. So one node, one object. Here's a file, it's attached with a media use. Here's another file, it's attached with a different use. And they're all file of this object. In terms of Fedora, they call this an RDF source. So it's a resource and it's made up of pure RDF. That's your node. There's no binary in your node. Basically, the RDF source, the node in Fedora, is just a bunch of metadata. Right, so here's the flowchart of how you get your node into Fedora. First, you start with your object in Drupal, your node or media, and it has fields. If you want to see those fields, you can select, it shows you the fields. Then the RDF module does an RDF mapping. These are configured per node type, so per bundle. And this, when you load your node, if you looked in the source in the HTML, you would see some inline RDF stuff. So if you've got like DC creator as your like creator thing, and down there you've got Lucy Maud Montgomery, go and inspect that element and you'll probably see a DC creator, Lucy Maud Montgomery, like deep in the code. But we use that as well, and we pass that raw information into the JSON LD module. So RDF just means triples, subject, predicate, object. JSON LD is almost like a way of representing JSON. Turtle is another format, so JSON LD is a format. We wrote the JSON LD module, and it has, excuse me, a hook JSON LD alter normalized array. This one function does an awful lot of stuff. It basically lets you override and add to and correct stuff that was in that RDF once you've like got your RDF mapping plus your fields, and like lets you really craft that to what you want it to be. The JSON LD module makes your JSON LD data available at your node question mark underscore format equals JSON LD. 2 years ago in the conference, I was like, I knew which modules this all came from. I think it's part of like the REST API or something. But that's why there's that weird, it's not, we didn't just like randomly decide to put all those weird characters up there. It's a standard module that dictates that we're gonna make it look like that. And then finally, that exact same stuff that you see at question mark underscore format equals JSON LD gets sent to Fedora or BlazeGraph. And then if you wanted to see it, you could load up the Fedora URI that shows at the bottom of most nodes. So let's go step by step. First part of RDF mappings. The RDF module was originally created as a Google Summer of Code project. So it was like sponsored by Google, and it was a way to add some like RDF metadata into your website. But there's no interface. They didn't get around to like completing the module exactly. So there's no way to set it up. You have to go into the configuration and edit the YAML, yet another markup language. That's how all the configuration in Drupal looks. If you have to do this, which you probably will if you're doing RDF stuff in Drupal, enable Devel's config editor. I posted about this on the list, but I want to show everybody because I don't want you to be wasting your time. So the Devel module, when it's enabled, which probably not on your production site, but hopefully you've got a development or staging site that you can use, Devel has its own like menu here. And at the far right is a link to configure. This allows you to enable a lot of other stuff, including config editor. So when you save that, then config editor becomes an easily accessible link. And you can just go down here and see RDF mappings and find the one for repository Islandora object and edit. And this is what the YAML looks like. It's not particularly easy to understand, but you know, it could be worse. Could be a lot worse. So at the top, it has a little bit about like this configuration. It tells you what it's called, what bundles it applies to. Here is the type. And this is when I said like, you can only assign one type per bundle. This is where that gets set. And then there's a section for field mappings. And here's each field using its machine name. And then the term properties and the RDF property that you want it mapped to. So there are a lot of fields in here. There are a lot of mappings. You're going to be using RDF prefixes. So like where it says RDAU, that's shorthand for some much longer string, for some much larger namespace. And those need to be pre-configured so that the system knows what your prefix stands for. And this is under configuration, media, search and metadata, JSON LD. So this is, probably you won't need to do too much with this, but this shows you all the currently available, installed, set up namespace prefixes. Pretty sure, yeah, RDAU is right there. That was what we were using, right? So those are namespace prefixes. There's two blocks here. The first one are, you can edit this text field and add extra namespaces. The second one should be more grayed out or something, but those are ones that were enabled by modules and you can't touch them. Okay. Oh, and confident telling you exactly when or when you won't need a data type callback, but that is an option, and you know, turns the value that's saved in Drupal into some other kind of value. Comment.
There you go.
Oh yeah, Carrie Gordon says RDF is being dropped from Drupal core. So I'm not sure how it got there in the first place, but yeah, it was for a little module. Tag module and the schema meta tag module do an amazing job of like an alternative to RDF. So I think that it's possible we might be moving that way. They essentially do the same thing. You know, you turn your fields, give it some predicates, and have it spit out structured RDF data, but it does it in, I think, a JSON LD format already. And it's much more easy to configure than the RDF module is. RIP RDF. All right, so our JSON LD module and that long ass hook, these does a bunch of things, like I mentioned. One of them is that type relation fields. Remember how we didn't want to make like 100 different author type fields for like actor, contributor, etc. It's in the JSON LD step where those values get assigned a predicate from the dropdown. In the context, we talked about those really weird, obscure extra things under index and delete. JSON LD self-reference, that schema same as thing that points the Fedora object to the Drupal object, and using that field to set the RDF type. So that's the alter JSON LD type. context thing that we set up to be field model. This is a great place for other modules to hook in and have their way with the RDF data before it gets sent to Fedora, if they desire. And then once every module has like implemented this hook, modules and hooks. So a hook is a thing that Drupal calls, and modules can implement. So basically as Islandora declares a function, and it's like a magic naming scheme. So like Islandora _ JSON LD alter normalized array is a function in the Islandora code. When the JSON LD module is like, oh, I need to make this JSON LD. It says, hey, modules, which of you has a JSON LD alter normalized array? And it'll find every instance, every module that implements this hook, and it'll call that module's code. So, you know, Islandora can do its thing, and controlled access terms can do its thing. They happen in kind of a random order. You can't really predict it. So if you are like, man, this would be a good thing to write a hook in, just be aware that you can't always determine which order it gets run in. All right, and then finally, the RDF gets presented at your node, taxonomy term media, _ format equals JSON LD. So in Fedora, it looks really different. We can take a look at an object. I was looking at the wrong one. We got some metadata on this one. Thank you, whoever made Fossil. So this is the object in Fedora. Created at last modified date or whatever are like Fedora's metadata about that. The properties, all the stuff in this box came from Drupal. So DC terms extent, one item was that default. I think most Islandora objects still have one item in there because it's like set as a default somewhere in the form. DC terms issued, you know, these things came from our RDF mappings. DC terms type and points to the taxonomy terms. Created author and stuff. Those are the Drupal things that I told you, like don't necessarily mesh with our digital object. And then at the bottom is RDF types, and there's a whole bunch of types there. Some of those are this LDP stuff is a Fedora thing. Perl.org core, I don't remember which ones of these are, but like audio and image and things like that use this style of type. It's a PCDM object. So Islandora wanted to implement PCDM. This was our decision to call these objects. And then the Fedora core Fedora stuff up there. So the stuff that you see here, exactly the same as you see at ? Blah, blah, blah. A lot of people looking at me. Oh my God. So it should be exactly the same as what you see here. What you see here shows a lot of like extra zeros and stuff, but it's semantically the same. Except for those couple fields that were added by Fedora. Note that this object in the sandbox is at /Islandora/FosHill. That's the alias, but its actual node ID is 83. That FosHill URL never comes into play once it starts going to Fedora. I don't think we have a way yet of telling it like, oh, and store the alias. So it'll just, according to Fedora, it's just node 83. Okay, BlazeGraph. So BlazeGraph takes the exact same JSON LD that Fedora does. BlazeGraph is a triple store. I don't know, it's a triple store. So you can throw RDF at it and then it makes a big graph you can query. So your queries could look something like this, where you want to select question mark something, where, and then you put the parentheses and then you kind of write out RDF statements with the question mark things stuck in there for the bits that you want to retrieve. So here I'm trying to find parents and children, where the child is member of the parent and the parent has RDF type collection. And it finds you all the collections in BlazeGraph. Oh, here I used like the full URI for these predicates, pcdm.org/models. If I wanted to not, you do have to declare your prefixes, like just above the select line. There's also in BlazeGraph, and I think this is in the instructions in the Islandora instructions, but you need to go into their namespaces tab and say use Islandora. Once you do that, it should be set for good and you can like query all your Islandora stuff. But if you're getting no results, even though you think you should be, namespaces, use Islandora. Say about like power of BlazeGraph?
Well, yeah, BlazeGraph is, if you ever get a chance to Google it, I'm not going to give it any justice telling anybody anything about it, other than saying that it is a really, really powerful thing that I feel like we kind of just tacked onto the side of Islandora instead of actually using it. And once somebody comes to the table with an example of how you could really leverage the power of BlazeGraph, I think we're going to have a lot more people interested in it, like pretty much the whole community, because it's super fast, makes connections that librarians don't have to make and probably can't make at large scale. I'm not a librarian. It's impressing me at the stuff that it can do. But from my impressions, talking to other librarians, my wife's a librarian, so I talked to her about it a little bit, and it does have a lot of potential that I think I don't fully appreciate, but I do at least appreciate from other people, like where they think this could go. And just the scale that this thing can have and being able to make those type of connections means that super powerful, super fast, could almost, I hate to say this out loud, especially since I'm being recorded, but probably could even almost be a better index than Solr in a lot of ways. So yeah, there was no way for me to give it justice, and I didn't want to try to cram it into a single slide or two. But I am going to encourage you to go out and just jump on YouTube. There's a couple of pretty interesting demos on BlazeGraph in general, and the way we're handling data into it is nothing new in that way. So it is very vanilla, so it should work out of the box. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember we used to use it, not BlazeGraph, the RDF, or the Sparkle query,
Yeah.
In 7X, and you could ask it all sorts of good stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you can still, there's the same queries you can still replicate, and this, so that's pretty awesome stuff.
One thing that you might want to know, I was overthinking this last night, but BlazeGraph doesn't know anything about Fedora. Once the JSON LD gets created, it gets sent separately to Fedora and BlazeGraph. So the Fedora URI that becomes the ID of each object in Fedora is like nowhere in BlazeGraph. So when you look at your Fedora, it's not particularly user-friendly. You know, each URL for an ID, for like an object, is some weird, you know, your Fedora URL /asli/df/2z/ whatever, all the way across. And when you're on a page in Fedora, like an Islandora node, it'll say, yeah, my parent is this node in Drupal. But what is his parent in Fedora? You don't know. You have to go like figure something out, right? Potentially query BlazeGraph. But even then, it'll just give you a Drupal node and won't be much help with your Fedora. So if you are, and this is where my brain was going, in the unfortunate situation of having to rescue your repository from just Fedora, it might be a good idea to take that RDF and put it into BlazeGraph so that you can map all those things back together and figure out what connections need to be made. Throwing information at you. So this part will cover Drupal views and Solr. We'll talk about what views are good for, show you some like a basic view and some more advanced stuff that makes it extra powerful, how we use Search API Solr with views, and how we set up facets. Views are nothing but ways of generating queries. Most of these resemble kind of SQL query syntax. So select title and author from some base table where published is true, and order by some ordering, and limit to some sort of limit. That's pseudocode, don't actually try to run that. But that's basically what you're doing when you're making a view. So there's kind of two types of views. There's the native Drupal views that query the Drupal database for Drupal objects. And then there's Search API views, which query a search index like Solr and return like Solr objects and link them to the Drupal objects. So there's a ton of tutorials available about views. A lot of Drupal ones and a lot of Islandora ones have done more than I can remember. And views run your site in a lot of different ways. They're very powerful. Okay. Kind of complicated. This is a simple view. This is that global view of all media that you get when you go to content media. So to kind of walk you through the basic chunks of this view, over here under fields are the fields of the media that are going to show up in the table. They'll show up if they're configured to. You can also hide them and then do cool stuff with them later behind the scenes, but that's not simple. The second of the block below are your filters. So this is the where clause. This is where you specify I just want to see these ones. Because this is an administrative view, all of these filters are exposed. And exposed means that it's the person viewing the view, interacting with it, gets to see, gets to configure whether this filter is applied or not. So you can filter by name. You can choose media type from a dropdown, and you can select whether or not you want to show just published or all, as well as published status or admin user, which I think administrator user. You're just a content editor user, some lower permissioned user on the Drupal site. If you were allowed to see the global media view, it might hide some objects from you that you weren't allowed to see. Those might be unpublished ones or other things. Filters aren't always exposed. Sometimes, like when you want to show like an object's children, you probably just want to show published items. So moving on to the middle column, the path settings are set up to be at admin content media. And as a menu, it shows up on a tab. So this is actually here in the view. that you're going to be able to navigate and click on manage content and click on media. The fact that you have that tab available is because of that stuff in the middle column of this view. So, you know, views really do drive your site, and you can do a lot of powerful stuff with this path settings. And then it lists, you know, which permissions do you need to see this view? Access media overview. So you could set up your content editor with permission to see this view, but not permission to see all media. And, oh, a comment. Technically, views is an SQL database report writer / generator. Yes, views really does do SQL, except I think that it ends up writing Solr as well. I'm not sure how that works yet. Okay, and then at the bottom, remember in my SQL, there was like a limit 50 or something. Here's where you can set the limit per page. So max items.
The header footer, if they want to add something.
Oh, sure. Okay, so the format section lets you control how this view looks. Usually, if you click on table, it would give you some options like HTML list and plain list and IF manifest if you did the right kind of view. So those are different views formatters. Table is, you know, a great one for administrative views because you can show the important columns and you can sort by it and filter by it and stuff. The settings beside that as well let you control various things about the table. So which columns are click sortable and what the default sorting is and stuff like that.
Well, the reason why I mention it is because you can only do so much formatting in a twig template. So if you're pumping out a table and you really need it to be just a plain list to manipulate or to show properly, this is the place to do it so that you get it delivered to the twig file in a manner that's useful to you.
So yeah, format, how it shows up to you, fields you select, the filters you put on, where it shows up, who gets to see it, and how many items you show per page. That's kind of the basics of views. Okay, it's a more complicated view. There's only two special cool things that are going on in this view though, so this will be like easier to explain. What I'm showing you is a sample of the media EVA views that we looked at before. So the way that a media EVA view works is that when it's on node 27, it'll all find like the media that are media of node 27. But 27 isn't hard coded into the view, it's contextual. So this happens under the third column with contextual filters, where it says it's going to be media of set to the node ID of the node that we're on. That's how we can get it to, you know, show the appropriate things. Okay, and then under relationships, if you were doing an SQL query, this would be a join. If you're not doing an SQL query, you're just making a view, you've selected to show the media. If you were to show the media's whatever's in field media use, it would display as a number. It points to a taxonomy term, but according to the media, all it knows is that it's pointing to media to taxonomy term 65. Taxonomy term 65 knows that it's called original file and blah, 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 blah. But so in order to make all that other information accessible to this view, which is a media view, we need to add a relationship to that taxonomy term that's connected under field media use. And so this way, we can get the external URL, which lives on the taxonomy term that's connected via field media use. We filter on it to say, just show me preservation master file, because that's the preservation master display. Powerful. And like with it, you can run all sorts of cool stuff. So unlike in Drupal 7 or Islandora 7, where we could just set up like a Solr page, a search page, to do that in Drupal 9, you make a view. So there are a few things that you need to set up with your Solr index first, and I'm just going to show you where they are. The Solr stuff is under configuration, search, evidently, search API. All right, so by default, you're going to have one Solr server and one default Solr content index. They're hierarchical. Server just has, you know, the URL of the server and stuff like that. The index is where all the interesting stuff happens. So if I click into here, it tells me that I'm, you know, indexing media, content, taxonomy terms. If I click into fields, I get to see what's actually indexed in Solr. So this page gives you a lot of power. What we see here are a whole bunch of different things that are configured as fields within Solr. Let's kind of go through them one by one. Under the general category, there are a number of these agent by role fields, and they're populated partly by the install profile, I believe. It allows you to say, you know, to get, it gives you, it populates it with any entity related via the linked agent field, where the relationship is CSL. The reason that the install profile had to do this is that typed relation fields would only just like send you the name of the related thing. It doesn't separate them out by type, but so some code in the install profile lets you do that. They're saved as strings. There are a whole bunch of different types of fields that Solr allows. You put the right kind of stuff into the right kind of field. At least in previous experiences that I've had with Solr, if you try to send a bad date, it will explode. It's not good. So these are set up as strings. Strings are super useful. It just takes a text, indexes it. You can search for the entire string and bring back the entire string, which is key. Other kind of field that's really important is full text. Here, there is a rendered item that gets stored as full text. And the rendered item has some configuration. Basically, you can set for every media type and content type that it knows about, whether to render that object using one of these view modes, or just don't include it in this field. So for instance, article, basic page, and repository item all use the search index view mode. So the reason that you'd probably do this is you'd go to that search index view mode and tell it to hide all the labels and show only the fields that you want indexed. And then voila, they're all automatically indexed, but they're indexed as one big blob that can be full text searched. We have a few more fields, a lot more fields set up. Hoping we had one indexed as a date, but I don't think we do. I don't think we can index EDTF dates as Solr dates yet, but that would be something that would be great to have.
There is efforts that we've done to remedy that.
Oh.
So if I'm able to share it, I will. But it's a problem, and I've seen it come up a couple of times where people we're all trying to reinvent the wheel on this. It's a great one though. Like, we got to reprocess the values coming in, so it gets really complicated when you start doing date ranges and stuff.
Yeah.
And I am not a Solr engineer. I feel like you need to have the engineer title to really jump under the hood too deeply with it. But you can create a preprocessor that'll process the values before they go into Solr, and that's ultimately what we have done.
Right. When you click add fields to add a new field, you'll see them ordered by category, so generals first. And then when I scroll down to find actual fields, let's say I don't want a field access. I don't know exactly what I'm looking for. Okay, fine. We'll use access control, field access terms. This is under content. So this means, in this case, content means nodes. These are fields that exist on nodes. Field access terms is a field that exists on nodes that is a relationship term. That is an entity relationship. It happens to be, but because it's an entity relationship, there's a little plus sign here. I can click that and it'll pop open a way to access the linked taxonomy term. I can pop that open and I can get all the fields that I want from this linked access control taxonomy term. So we just talked about like doing joins with that relationship thing. This is the same kind of deal, except that what I'm asking Solr to do is index a property of my related term on me being the node. So this is really cool. Problem is, it doesn't really let you go backwards. So by default, Solr API, Search API Solr wouldn't let you index the extracted text on a media that is media of me, because the node points to me. Because the media points to me, I don't point to it. If I pointed to it, this would work. I could just go through here. But because it points to me, something else has to happen. And that is where reverse reference comes in. So this is an install profile thing, as far as I know, that lets you get the media attached using field media of and index things about it, including, the text out of the file, stuff that you might really, really want. If I were to be indexing that text out of a file, I would definitely want it to be a full text field type. Because once I go in to create my view, once you're creating a search API view, the main way, the way to make a search box happen is to make a full text search exposed filter. This search, there we go. We'll be fine. Yeah. Okay. So here is the built-in search filter, search view. The main thing that makes this a searchable thing is this particular filter here, full text search. So what you probably want to do, like search box isn't useful if people can't type stuff into it, is expose this filter. And then you can select what operator gets used. So do you need all the words, any of the words, none of the words? Not sure why. And you can also tell this tell the search box which fields you want to search. By default, it searches all the full text fields. If a field doesn't show up in here, it's because it's not full text. Yeah. Okay. Does it need to then be manually added to the Solr index, or is there automatic index? if it shows, how do you want to search for it, I think is the real question. If you just need it to be full text available, then it might automatically be there. You might need to go into the search API, search index view mode and make sure that it's not disabled. But I think sometimes when you add new fields, they become like enabled in most view modes. So that might be automatic indexing, but it would just be within the big like realm of the full text stuff that Solr has about this object. So if you wanted to make it a facet, or you wanted to be able to do like searching based on just that field, then you'd need to specifically index it. Barreling through. All right, so we talked about this, the full text search filter needs to be present in your view. It is interesting that there are different sort criteria that are exposed to the user. And it also helps that we put our exposed form in a block. By doing this, that means that you need to go to the block layout page and put your block somewhere. But that is not too difficult. And then under the footer is a huge list of facets. They actually show up in the sidebar. You don't need to necessarily put them here in the footer. You can place them as blocks using the block placement page. But this is how the Islandora theme, what the Islandora theme works with. So let's talk facets. They're the things that pop up usually on a sidebar once you've done a search. So here I've searched for Lucy Maud Montgomery, and only one thing showed up, so this is not a super great example. But you can see there's a bunch of different fields, agent by role publisher, author name, member of, and model, that are showing up as facets. And each of these would be a link that I could click, and it would filter my search to show what I searched for, filtered down to just the things that have that value. So where do you set these up? They are under search and metadata facets. So this is under configuration. Here at the bottom is facets. We're talking about this after we pointed out that view, because facets need a facet source. Is the machine name of the view that we were just looking at, that search API Solr view. Have two facet sources, blah, 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 page one and blah, 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 block one. And that's because the search API Solr view has two displays. One's a block and one's page. So your facets need to live underneath one of these. And then you can click add facet and select, let's do the global one. Here's where it lets you select a field in Solr. Note, this is really important. The only types it lets you select are Boolean, date, decimal, integer, and string. Mostly you'll probably want string and maybe date. But that's why this list of fields is much shorter than the list of fields that we actually put into Solr. So those are facets. Sorry. All right. So showing it as a list of links, that's the default. If this were a proper date, I could use this date item processor. Have it show, just the year of the date or something like that. But for that to work, the field would have to be a Solr date. And our date fields are EDTF, which are Solr strings, not Solr dates. Then once you've created facets in that facet API that shows this giant list, each of the things in this giant list are blocks that can be placed somewhere in your site under structure block layout. So you don't see But if you were to click place block under one of these and type in, you can see there's a lot of the same names of facets under here. These are probably, for the two different displays. I'm not sure which one's which. They could be placed there if you were so desiring. Probably you're not and want to place them like not at the top header, but in a sidebar or in your content under your view, or even in the view itself in its header or footer. That brings us of Solr and views and facets. Are there any questions? Set field weights for Solr in the Drupal URI. Yes, you can. Here under search API, edit fields. You can give it boost. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Sometimes you can give it boost. I'm not sure why it took boost away there. It appears you can only do boost in full text, which kind of makes sense because those are the ones you're searching across all of. Title has a boost of 8. Awesome. Migration bulk import. We're going to talk about Workbench. We're not going to talk about migrate Islandora CSV or migrate 7x claw. Those were ways of using migrations that were developed first, kind of complicated, and I think they're mostly covered by Workbench for the most part.
I am, again, not an expert in Workbench, but I try to, I think we cover most of it, generally speaking. Some of them, Workbench is more or less a bulk importer. And I know we all usually use it interchangeably with the terminology of a migrate, if you're going to migrate your stuff, but really it's going to bulk import whether you're coming from 7 or something else. I'm going to read this list for you, but it does communicate through HTTP interface. It uses CSVs and spreadsheets. It can use a Google spreadsheet. I didn't put it in here, but it can also do Excel, right? Yeah.
I think so.
It could be pointing to a local file, so your images, videos, whatnot, or it could be pointing to remote files and download them to import in. It can be used to create anything from nodes, taxonomy terms, collections, down to even deleting those things. It's multi-platform, or at least been tested on pretty much the main 3, so Linux, Windows, Mac, and it does require Python 3.7, I believe. And it's got built-in fixity checking, so it figures out what your CSV file says is this, should it be the hash, and if it downloads the file for you, it checks the hash on its way up. A couple other key points that are, if you're reading through the documentation for it, it is really well documented. One thing is it's mainly a terminal application. They do actually have desktop, which is like, I think, Atom based. It hasn't been updated in a couple of years now, but it's there. But mainly it's just terminal. I mean, it's just a couple, you write one liner to do a few things, and it's pretty simple. It does have, I put in here the ETL method, only because it's so emphasized in documentation. I think most people just would glaze over, not really sure what it means to, but really extract, transform, and load is what that stands for, and threw it up in there. But I'm not sure how to really define it much more than what it's the 3 words. It's pretty straightforward. One thing I thought was pretty cool, I put in the paradox warning here. You can reference something within your CSV that hasn't been imported yet. So if you're saying I want to create something, but it's related to something else, it creates what's called a stub, and then when it's finishing up, it can actually make that connection. So you don't have to worry about order of operations really. As long as it's in there or it's going in there, it'll figure it out. It can do not just add stuff in. I mentioned this earlier, just a second ago, but you can take stuff away. So if there was already a node in there, like, you know, the home page, you want to delete the home page and put something else in, you can make that part of your migration. There's also, if you need to redo, like if most people push the stuff in, looks wrong, you can always undo what you just did and then roll it back in again. It's a pretty straightforward process. That does support not just delimiters, but sub-delimiters, which I thought was really helpful. So if you've ever tried to write out by hand a CSV file with something that would have delimiters in it, it could be a real pain to go one step deeper with it. So I'll right through this because it's super simple. Up there is an example of a config file. So it's just the type of task it is. So this one shows us create, where the host is, and a username and password. That's the bare minimal. But the list of configs, if you go to their documentation, is extensive, to put it mildly. To set it up, I learned this the hard way because I'm like, it's not running. It's not running. I'm running the command. It's not running. You have to run the pip install or setup first. So that's why I put it in red text right there, just below it. So the Python 3 setup install user, run that first, and it'll install all the prerequisite Python packages that you need. And then when you create your config file, if you want to check it before you run it, which is really smart, this is mentioned all over the documentation. Please check your config before you start. There's a lot of outputs. I didn't want to bore you with an insane list. There's several types of outputs. So you can get once you're done, you get your node list of everything that was created, what terms, files, and whatnot, and where they're at. You have a lot of options as well of how to log out your information. So if you really want to debug your migration process, you can. And that was it. Like I didn't want to, there's not much to it. It's pushing data in, and it's a really simple interface. Don't need to be the developer to use it. And you can have, like I mentioned earlier, the Google spreadsheets. So multiple people can be adding and trying and testing, and you don't have to download that spreadsheet to anything. You just point to the Google spreadsheet, and as long as it has access to read it, it can use it. Yeah. Super quick, sorry. Any questions about Workbench before I?
Does it have a rollback function?
Yeah, it'll roll back, but I think the nodes, like once you've created a node, that node ID is now reserved. So if you don't go through the process of an update and you roll back completely, it now shifts the node numbers over, which isn't really that important if you're doing it locally on your development environment, but it might be important if you're doing it in a production environment. That's the conclusion of it.
That's it.
Yeah. So questions, comments, anybody got their stuff working that didn't have it working earlier? Just one person. Any other questions? Give you back your 8 minutes.
Great.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Maybe.
Feel free to ask questions in Slack. That is like the easiest, fastest way to get answers to your questions, by the way.